everybody, and welcome to this episode of Talk of the Town, which brings us to Town Hall to talk to one of our favorite folks to talk to, our town manager, Adam Chapdelaine. Today we'll be talking about two issues of concern to lots of Arlington citizens, one being the parking meters, still newly installed in town, and the second, issues around snow and ice removal after the recent storms. So, Adam, as always, we know that you carved time out of your busy schedule to spend time with us, so we appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
As always, thank you. Let's start off by talking about the situation with the parking meters, and it's been, I think, about 3 months or so since the rollout. What can you tell us just about how that has gone, how things, again, very short space of time, we understand, but how are things looking compared to whatever kind of immediate expectations you might have had?
So I think there's been good. There's been some less than good, and then there's been some unexpected or proportionally unexpected challenges. I think the good has been, I've seen members of the parking implementation and governance committee have seen, and then our economic development coordinator talking with store owners along the area where our parking meters have seen significant parking availability and turnover since the meters have been put in. So that's good. That was the intended purpose of them. We want turnover, we want parking availability, so that at least anecdotally seems to have been effective.
I have to jump in and just say, I think that has absolutely been the case from my experience as somebody moving in and through the center of town relatively regularly throughout the week. Definitely much more available parking. I have to say that.
So we'll start with a good checkbox, right? We've had some challenges keeping the meters running in the first 3 months. That was primarily driven by the meters jamming when they filled up with coins too soon. We had thought we could maintain it with in-house personnel. That proved too much with existing personnel. So we contracted with an outside firm that started 2 weeks ago that is keeping the meters emptied so they shouldn't jam up. There's still the potential to jam up if someone puts 2 quarters in or someone puts a Canadian quarter in or if there's snow in the machine. It's not impossible to jam them, but I think just in the past couple weeks we've rectified that problem. It did cause some frustrations for a few weeks, I know, specifically on Medford Street where there was more turnover and more jamming happening that the meters weren't functioning properly, but I think we've gotten over that.
And did that problem manifest itself the same at all meters? In other words, would jamming just mean that you couldn't then get a coin in if you were trying? Because I had also heard that some folks there was a blank screen and they were not able to figure out, like, it might accept money, but nothing had happened after that.
So I have not heard that particular one yet, and the software that backs up the meters shows when a meter's not operable. So the treasurer's office, where the parking clerk's function lives, is able to look at reports of when meters aren't operable, and we actually talked about it at the parking committee last week and said he hasn't received any reports that meters have gone completely down. So I guess what I would say to that is, if someone sees that and they can call the parking clerk's office so that we can immediately look into what happened, that would be great. My guess would be if that happened, maybe it wasn't getting the proper solar charge or something like that, but I that has not yet been brought to my attention.
Fair enough. I mean, that may just not really be very prevalent of an issue. I would certainly want to make that clear that this is something I overheard in one venue, and that was that. So, but anyway, so we got the good,
good.
Not so good.
And then so the unexpected was the 25 or 30 inches of snow in a 4 or 5 day period that created a lot of snow on the sidewalks. So not that snow's unexpected, but that was a lot pretty fast, and it became readily apparent to us that with these parking revenues we're receiving from the meters, that if we're successful in creating a parking benefits district at town meeting this year, that for next year we should put aside some funds to upgrade snow clearing operations in Arlington Center where the meters are, so that not only are we making the meters accessible when it snows, that'll be an overall improvement to the business district too, if the snow's taken care of in a more expeditious manner, so that people can come, to and from the center and do business.
Great. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the revenues being generated. My understanding, going back to conversations that I had with you and others before the parking meters came into effect was that it was going to be generally a revenue neutral situation. And again, with the full acknowledgement that we're only 3 months into this, are there any more signs? What you just brought up, does that mean that okay, now planning is needing to begin to happen, or you can assume that perhaps there will be a surplus actually coming out of the parking revenues?
Yeah, so as we look at the revenues, the parking meters on the streets generate just about $1,000 a day in revenue. It seems to be pretty consistent across all 6 days a week that they're on. And if that maps out, and then we look at the costs that we expect to incur in operating the meters and the already existing costs of operating the meters that were in the lots, we project to be able to cover our costs, still provide the same amount of general fund revenue that we were receiving in the past, and also be able to put a number that I'm still trying to pin down, but probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year towards a parking benefits district, which would be money that would be directly reinvested in Arlington Center. Could be as simple as upgraded snow clearing, street cleaning, hanging flower baskets, or more significant investments like that benefits district, putting money towards a capital improvement to the district. Could be a redesign of Mass Ave, could be dressing up the alleyway that leads from the Russell Common lot over to Medford Street, could be improving David Lampson Way, which is that alley or that street that leads into the Water Street or the railroad lot. So there's a lot of different things we could do with those revenues.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've never heard the term parking benefits district before. Does that mean then that whatever it is that those revenues would be spent on would be specific to whatever that is designated as this district that is to be benefited?
Correct, yes.
Okay, in that case, what we're talking about is the same place, Arlington Center, where the meters themselves are.
Exactly. And it's brand new, so it's not surprising. It's sort of a new term. When Nelson Nygaard came in and did this study several years ago for parking management in Arlington Center, they introduced us to that term, parking benefits district. But then just last year, when the legislature passed the Municipal Modernization Act, and then it was signed by Governor Baker, it included a provision that fully and legally allowed the creation of a parking benefits district, whereby you could take meter revenue and reinvest it. So it's really sort of a newish concept of taking meters, managing parking, creating availability, and putting the revenue back into the district. So if it's all working, it can be a real win-win for the community.
Mm-hmm. And I would assume, and I think this would accord with how you were describing some of the potential places that you might spend these funds, that you'd begin by doing the things that would need to be done to mitigate the parking experience and the operation of the parking meters, et cetera, accessibility of the parking meters, deal with all of those things as the first priority, and then as those were dealt with and there's more money to be spent, then you could move on to other kinds of improvement in the area.
Exactly right.
Okay. So I think people, some from what we've heard, are confused even about the structure of parking enforcement. So we now have these meters which would create, we think, a greater need for what are called, meter people, or those who would monitor this and ticket, to be, out there and actively doing so. Does that mean that the parking enforcement department, I have several questions. I'll start with, does that mean that it has expanded? You have more people doing that than you did before?
We actually don't. We have 2.5 PCOs, parking control officers is the updated term. And from what I've at least initially heard from Officer Corey Rateau, who manages the parking control officers as part of the police department, is that with the meters, they're able to move much faster than they were. You might recall it used to be chalking the tires to check the 2-hour limit, and that was a pretty labor-intensive process where they would chalk all the tires and then have to come back through and check the chalked tires. Now there's actually flashing light indicators on the meters, so they're able to very quickly see where there are violations and go to those violations. So he has told us, at least thus far, they've moved through their routes quicker. If that holds up, I think we would keep staffing the same. If it doesn't hold up and we feel like the heights in the east without the meters aren't getting the same attention as the center, then I think we would look at expanding staffing.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like their job is simpler, no
Yeah.
easier in a sense, but certainly simpler. So
Yeah.
that's to the good. And you just mentioned that that Corey heads this part of the police department. That segues into the other question I had, which is, under whose direction is this happening? Is this a police department? Is this a division of the police department? Is it the town? What is the supervisory, I guess, structure for parking?
So statute has to separate parking enforcement and then ticket adjudication, so that the people who are enforcing aren't the same people making the decision about whether that enforcement holds up.
Makes sense.
So it does. When you say it out loud, it makes sense. So the parking control officers, the people writing the tickets, are housed in the police department, managed by Corey Rateau, up through the chief. The parking clerk is currently the town treasurer, Steve Gilligan, and there's a parking data input operator who operates in the treasurer's office. They do all of the ticket inputting, and then if someone comes and appeals a ticket, they sit with the treasurer in appeal, or have their appeal heard by the parking clerk. So there's those two separate functions. In terms of management, we've put a lot of those responsibilities on the treasurer's office because the parking clerk role serves there. The deputy treasurer, Mike Morris, has really done yeoman's work in managing the actual meters themselves. He does all the back-end software work. So as we move forward, I think we have to analyze whether or not that can continue to exist as a parking clerk function within the treasurer's office, or if we need to pull it out and have a standalone parking clerk office. I think it's too early to determine that now. And I don't want to scare anybody. If we were to expand into the Heights in the east with metered enforcement, that probably would justify a larger administrative operation. But in its current format, we're going to continue to analyze and see what would be necessary.
Okay, so you say if there were to be expansion, either east or west from the center, either down to East Arlington or up to the Heights, where does that stand as a possibility right now? Do you need to wait a whole lot longer to find out what happens with the current meters, or where's thinking or planning at with that idea?
So there's no active discussions about it. I would say a few things. One, we're going to put together a monitoring plan for availability in the center. Howard Muse of the Transportation Advisory Committee has put together a framework of what he would recommend. We're going to, as a parking committee, go through that framework, finalize it, hire someone to come in and do parking counts on a Thursday and then on a Saturday, so we get a weekday and a weekend usage, and see if we're getting the availability we want. Before we look at anything else, I think we want to make sure we're actually getting something beyond that anecdotal take that we're creating parking availability. Beyond that, I think metering works in Arlington Center because we have alternatives. We're saying you have to pay $1 an hour on the street, and you only stay for 4 hours. But if you want to go to the lot, that's not all that much further away. You only have to pay 50 cents an hour, and you can stay all day. So we're providing longer-term and shorter-term options in Arlington Center. In the Heights and in the East, we don't have those lot options. So that, I feel, this is just my opinion, that creates more of a challenge of creating a system that works for everybody. It doesn't make it impossible, but it's sort of a built challenge that we'd have to deal with. So we'd have to look at whether or not maybe a lower cost structure in either of those business districts worked, or whether it would work at all before we made any decisions.
Mm-hmm. And, so you've identified what, potential problems there might be in terms of, giving people options, and that, having fewer of them may be problematic for a rollout in either of those other areas. I also, though, wonder whether your sense of the need for the kind of transformation that you're looking for in terms of people coming in and out and parking being available in Arlington Center, is there a similar need in either East Arlington or in the Heights right now? Has that been a problem for businesses or for those who would patronize those businesses in those areas?
This is again anecdotal. I hear from business owners in the East about parking concerns probably more than the Heights. Doesn't mean that it's not a concern in the Heights, but in the Heights there's the DiAgostino's Penzi's parking lot. There's the side parking, the head-in parking in front of ACMI on Park Ave. So there's a little more parking, the meat house, or what is it now? My
Yeah,
butcher shop, Prime Butcher Shop,
Butcher Shop.
and those
Yeah,
stores, they have rear parking. So there's a little more private parking options in the Heights that probably takes a little bit of that pressure off. The East, it's either you're on Mass Ave or you're in the neighborhood, so there's really no private options to speak of. So I hear it a little more there. I think we'd have to do further study to determine if there really is a parking availability issue or not. I mean, to some degree, it's that classic problem where we'll park a half a mile from the mall, but feel like we've got a good parking spot. But if we can't park right in front of the storefront in a downtown center, we don't feel like we've gotten a good parking spot, which is not really, when you think about it, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's a practical challenge, I guess, of linear parking.
So then just to wrap up this part of the conversation, as of right now, all of that is to be determined, and at some point, not in the immediate future for sure.
It is definitely not imminent.
Okay. Wrapping up in general on the parking question, or the parking meter question, I wondered whether there has been anything. You already alluded to the snowfall and the ramifications of that, which were, could not be entirely foreseen, et cetera. Anything else that's come up that has been a surprise or not what you would have imagined or been taken into consideration? Or I don't want to say, or has it been a smooth rollout as if those are the only options? But anything else that's been a little surprising or that you've had to adjust to?
So I wouldn't say it's surprising, but what we've heard from a few folks is the removal of the 15-minute spot in front of the post office has made it a little bit tougher to get in and out of the post office for just a quick stop in. And that makes sense, maybe if you're stopping in to go get your hair done or go to lunch, you're going to be there for a couple hours, and you might park on Court Street and not have the availability at the post office. So we're going to take a look at whether or not reinstating during daytime hours a few 15-minute spaces on Court Street and then having them revert to the 4-hour limit once dinner time rolls in might be the right thing to do. So, I think we'll continue to see little things like that where we just want to make sure we're making sure it works for the actual uses that are on the street. And that's the great thing about these meters. They're hard infrastructure, but they're all powered by software.
Software, right.
So you can program things to be changed,
Right, such as I think the 15 minutes that people can get just by hitting a button, so that they get a 15 minutes just if they're running in and out of someplace and they don't have a quarter or whatever. That I think clearly that was a software adjustment that was not hard to implement, and also seemed both to anticipate people's needs, but also to respond, I think, in some cases, to what people found in the first weeks or months of using these meters.
Yeah, and I hope that people feel that is us putting our money where our mouth is, that this was not about just boosting revenue or trying to, give people trouble with parking. We want turnover. We want people to find parking. So giving you 15 minutes free and then you're gone, we're still meeting that goal. So I think that has eased the rollout a little bit, that if you're just grabbing a cup of coffee, you don't have to scramble to find that quarter or put your credit card in. You can just hit the button, get in your coffee, and be on your way.
Okay, let's move on to topic 2 for today's conversation. And I have to just preface it by saying that I don't know if we at ACMI should take any credit or blame for any of this, but it was interesting to note that we did run a piece on our news a few weeks ago about the potential effects in the spring of the mild winter that we were enjoying. Within hours, we were dealing with significant snowfall. The recent snowfalls were dramatic, kind of reminiscent of what happened a couple of years ago in the January and February and March, I guess, of mostly January and February 2015. And people have been less than satisfied with some aspects of cleaning up and cleaning out from there. I'm not here to address a laundry list of people's complaints, but let's start with this. Some folks many people use the MBTA, the bus system here in Arlington, and found that snow accumulation around bus stops was an issue, not only on the days of the storm, but in the days following the storms. To begin with, who's responsible for keeping those areas as clear and accessible as possible? Is that the MBTA? Is that the town? How does that work?
So on the key bus routes, which the 77 is one, and the 79 obviously shares those stops along with the 350 and to some degree the 350 when they take the turn off Pleasant Street. For key bus routes, the MBTA says it's their responsibility. But all they will take responsibility for is shoveling one walking path. So not clearing out the whole length of the bus stop, but just one path.
So if there's a single way to get, as long as they clear a way to get from the sidewalk to the bus door.
Yes.
Then they've done
what they deem to be their responsibility. The next step, I would say, and this is challenging, is to some degree it is the abutters' responsibility. We have the bylaw in place that puts responsibility on both residential and commercial abutters to clear the sidewalk. So in some of the narrower sections of sidewalk where there's bus stops, that responsibility is definitely there to be able to clear a path to give people access to the bus stops. Beyond that, we take it upon ourselves to clean them out, but they're not number one on the priority list of what we do after plowing is completed. Number one on the priority list is crosswalks near schools and walking routes to schools. Number two are crosswalks up and down Mass Ave and Broadway. While we're doing those crosswalks, we also clear out the bus stops. So what happened this past series of storms, we had that Thursday storm and then the Sunday, Monday storm. There was no real recovery time to be able to do any crosswalk clearing along Mass Ave or the bus stops during that period of time. And then after the Sunday, Monday storm, we started clearing bus stops and crosswalks from the Lexington line coming down towards Cambridge, or towards the center, and then Cambridge. And then we had that small 2 or 3 inches that had to pull everybody off overnight, which meant that we didn't complete all the way to the Cambridge line, I think, until Friday night, Thursday or Friday night. So it was a longer period than we expected. The challenge becomes it's the same people that drive the plow trucks, or the same people that clear crosswalks, or the same people that clear bus stops. So, we can't clear them while plowing operations are underway. We can't clear them while we're clearing routes to schools. We clear them as we do the crosswalks. So I for one, I don't use transit every day, but I use it a lot. My wife uses it every day. So I drive up and down the avenue and I see these bus stops and I'm like, grabbing the steering wheel, like looking at every bus stop as I see it unshoveled. Probably more frustrated with the MBTA that I think, I think that T does a great job with the resources that it has, but I also think that it's a quiet disinvestment in bus service by not coming out and clearing those bus stops and putting some money behind that responsibility. So
yeah, and it just does put a lot of pressure again. The people who live in the areas served by the bus system are not going to know, like I didn't, and that's why I asked you the question.
Yeah.
I assume most Arlingtonians don't. Who are they supposed to turn to? Who can they have a reasonable expectation is going to be dealing with this, or who do they alert about this? If people don't know, and therefore the MBTA does just a little bit and says that's fine, that just puts an awful lot of pressure, I would think, on town, DPWs, et cetera. And yeah, I could imagine that there would be a little bit of frustration on the town side with that as well.
Yeah, and I would feel like even in a large amount of snowfall, if that footpath is cleared, able-bodied folks, they're going to be okay, right? They might be a little delayed, a little backed up. Where the real challenge is if you have any need for handicap accessibility, that footpath is not going to get you on that bus, and that's a real problem. So in past years, we've tried to get a contract with an outside private contractor to come in and do the bus stops as a priority. We actually couldn't get anybody to bid on that work. So I'd say in future years, we're going to continue to try that. And I say that as a statement of we get it, we know it's a priority, but resources and availability of resources is a challenge in getting it done in the immediate aftermath of a storm.
Something else that we were hearing about, another situation that I think was not uncommon, unfortunately, was there were ATMs, for instance, that people do want to be able to access, obviously, at banks. that were virtually inaccessible because of the accumulation of snow and ice right around them. And I think folks are wondering, clearly that's, as you've already mentioned, that's incumbent on the commercial or residential property owners to keep things clear. Yeah. And clearly a bank would have an incentive to do that anyway. But if they're not, what are the mechanisms for enforcement there?
Call the police department and they'll dispatch a patrol officer to either get compliance, and if he can't get compliance, fine the property owner. And so residents could call 781-643-1212. That's the non-emergency line. Log the complaint, and a patrol officer will definitely be dispatched to deal with it.
Okay, and in general, do you find that that's a difficulty for the town, kind of the enforcement of this kind of, safety, to taking the appropriate steps to make sure that things are both safe and convenient and accessible on the part of business owners?
It's tough because we can find them, right? But doesn't absolutely make them shovel the walk. So if they don't shovel it, we could issue a fine a day, and it's still not going to be a safe,
Sure.
accessible place to walk.
Sure, and whatever you do in terms of fining is going to happen at some point down the road, but doesn't have any effect on their behavior at the time, which is the big problem.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the bus stops, that one of the difficulties around bus stops and other places is just the access for folks who are not able-bodied, who will need a kind of wider expanse perhaps to work through, or just something that's much more reliable in terms of where they're putting their feet, et cetera. And I have to say that we had our own experience outside of ACMI's studio up in the Heights, Studio A, during this past storms, where another colleague and I spent a good hour and a half, 2 hours trying to make a pathway from where all the plows had just dumped a huge pile of snow right on basically people had to walk quite a ways out on the street until we carved this tunnel out, basically. And we didn't mind doing that, in that it's better for everybody around if you can have a safe path along the sidewalk. By the same token, that's a town-owned building as far as we understand. How does that, how do we resolve issues like that? Or is it simply, are you hoping basically that most folks in our situation will react as we did in that case?
Yeah, so is this the corner up on Park Ave?
It's on Park Ave
Revere?
and Paul Revere, exactly. It was a good 5 to 6 feet of snow piled up there.
In a case like that particular case, I'd say call the DPW, and they'd probably get a crew out with a Bobcat to clear it out. But that's Park Ave, it's heavily traveled, it's town-owned, but leased, building, so it's a little bit of a different situation. If you're in your neighborhood and you're on a corner lot, it's tough, right? We could eventually get a crew out to help you, but I would never be able to promise that we'd be able to get a crew out in 2, 3, or even 4 days to be able to knock down every corner pile. So I actually live on a corner lot now, so I've gotten my own taste of it, this winter, having to do that same shoveling the mound out routine, and it's heavy, and I'm, young enough and able-bodied, but it's hard and time-consuming, so I get that. But again, that particular one, we would come out and try to take care of it.
And there's nothing that can be done on the actual plowing side. The conditions or the decisions or the procedures that lead to the buildup of those piles, there's nothing that can be altered there, or?
I gotta say, not to sound glib, if anybody can ever figure out the right balance of how much to leave in the driveways or how much to push to the corners, I'll hire them, right? Because it's
fair enough.
So as plow drivers will push it down, and we regularly get complaints about driveways being plowed in, which means, that some degree of the snow is being left. But then if there's a tighter tuck to the curb that's pushing all the snow down, at the end of that street or that corner or whatever it is, it's got to be pushed somewhere. So it really is such a, I don't know, I don't mean to, again, to be funny, but I don't know where else to push the snow.
And I do know that it was just a huge, it was a colossal, as in the size of the piles were colossal, but also the conundrum or the challenge was colossal these 2 years, 2 years ago, just to find a place to
push it, yeah.
all the snow. And yeah, so clearly I floated that question, but I think that it's very reasonable for you to basically be saying, yeah, we'd love to have an answer to that, but it's hard to figure out right now.
Take a snowblower back to the sky.
Last question on this, I think, and that has to do with private ways. So there's a lot of private ways, or some significant number, I think, in town. I myself live on one. And I'm wondering, does the town have any leverage for what happens on private ways? Because, so if those places are made inaccessible because people are not, choose not to clear spaces that on the public roads they'd have to. What if anything can the town do?
So you mean like sidewalks on private ways, or
sidewalks on private ways, and just the buildup of snow even out into the road?
Yeah, actually, I would have to verify this, but I don't think our snow removal bylaw covers walks on private ways. So that would be a challenge. I don't know how we would. Yeah, I'd have to talk to Doug, the town council, but I don't know how we could compel people to clear it on the private way.
And I guess I assume that most private ways are not, don't operate as ingress or egress to other places that people want to get to.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
But I guess on rare occasions that is the case, and so some folks were wondering, can't we do anything about this? Maybe not.
Yeah, I don't think there's enforcement, but I'd say private way, public way. If you have either the physical means or the financial means to clear your walk, clear your walk. It's good for you. It's good for your neighbors. It's good for the town. I get just as frustrated as anybody when I walk up my street, and you got 20 feet of clear walking, and then you got one house that didn't clear their walk, and it's frustrating.
That absolutely is.
Right? You don't want to fall. You don't want your kids to fall. You don't want your wife
to fall. It's almost the definition of community in a lot of ways. Is the fact that if everybody's on board, things are great and smooth. Yep. Any free riders, any folks who just aren't willing to kind of do the same things that others are doing, and things get derailed, literally in some ways very quickly. Okay, so having covered those two separate topics fairly extensively, and appreciate your doing so as always, let's just finish by like the dovetail of the two. And again, you mentioned that these storms did create certain kinds of situations and challenges for the parking meters. So some of the ones that people have brought up had to do with just accessibility to the parking meters themselves, so that people would be willing and able to pay. Yep. They wanted to stay for some significant amount of time in that space and couldn't figure out how to get the money into the meter. What can you say? What do you say to those folks? I mean, maybe they got tickets. I don't know.
So I'll start by saying we did instruct the parking control officers to not ticket if the meter was inaccessible. So I think we issued a few, got some pushback, and then quickly changed the directive of, hey, look, this is tough. We're not going to get all this cleared out immediately. Hold off on issuing tickets. So we did do that, and I think that worked out okay. In terms of clearing it, I think there's two things we need to do. Hopefully next year.
Right. Hopefully it is a year away, right?
We need to make sure we get a wide enough path where the meters are so that people can actually stand and access the meters. So there's definitely some areas I saw where the snowbank came out so far that you couldn't even reach the meter.
Couldn't, yeah.
The other challenge, though, is getting, I don't know if you want to call them rows or walkways from your car so that you can get to the sidewalk to the meter. And that's a funny thing that you probably want those everywhere in commercial corridors because you don't want people walking in the middle of the street or the bike lane to get to wherever their destination is. But it becomes even particularly more challenging that if you park, let's say you park in the middle of this block here next to Town Hall, you either have to walk all the way to Town Hall or all the way to the library to come back around, even if the sidewalk's plowed wide enough to feed that meter, or trudge through a snowbank and hope you have the right footwear on to be okay to do it.
That's right.
So I think we have to figure out, do we bust holes open every car space? Is it every other car space? I think we can do it, and it'll cost money, and we'll figure out how to pay for it with the parking revenues. But I think we just have to figure out a strategy of at what intervals do we.
Yeah, that seems like that seems like it would go a long way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it hardly seems like you have to cater to us, the populace, to the degree of doing it at every parking space, but something that involves less than
the whole block.
50, 60, 100 yards walking in one direction and back the other, or something like that seems like, that should work.
Yeah.
Anything else that you heard about from Arlington citizens and residents that was basically the result of this combination of parking meters still being fairly new and this snow coming in the way that it did?
I think it was mostly the issues we've talked about, just actually accessing the meters being the challenge. We always have to pay attention to the meters in the lots. The plows will come by and sometimes occasionally plow up the meters,
Right.
so we'll have to go back and plow out those meters. That's easier though, there's 2 or 3 meters in each lot, so that's not as hard to get to. But yeah, generally it was access. It was make sure that you can actually access the meters.
Yeah, so something that's come up right through this conversation is just the fact that, individual citizens have or residents have situations that arise and that don't work for them for whatever reason, around parking or snow or some combination of the two. And you have mentioned that the police department would be the right place to call for certain things, the parking clerk for other things. Just wondering if you can give us just a quick summary of if it's this kind of issue you want to call here. And then beyond that, is there a way of knowing, is there a way for Arlingtonians to know, hopefully in real time, but relatively promptly, is there a way for them to know whether something that they were going to report has already been reported, what the, how things are going to, like issues or situations such as snow accumulation are going to be dealt with, in what order or whatever, so that, again, you're not clogging, citizens aren't clogging the system, but they also can get useful information. So I know that's a lot in one ask, but take it at whatever pace you'd like.
So I will say police, call them for snow clearing on sidewalks if you feel like someone's not meeting the bylaw requirement to remove the snow from the walks. For parking meter issues or any general parking concerns, if you've had a ticket written or you have questions about the meter isn't working, call the parking clerk's office. For snow removal, whether it be snow mounds on corners or snow removal on your street, crosswalks, bus stops, any snow removal questions, and for that matter, questions about trees, questions about potholes, questions about the condition of your sidewalks or road, that all goes to the DPW. The way that currently works, you can call dispatch, 781-316-3000, and talk to DPW, and they will log your concern. Or you can go online to the Request Answer Center and make a request about any number of those concerns. What neither of those systems have, though, is the ability for you to check in passively and see where it is. You can go back and forth.
You have to be reporting, in other words? Or?
Yeah, so let's say you reported, my snow pile is too high on this corner. You'd send it into the system would respond saying, thank you, we've received it, and we'll program it as appropriate. You wouldn't hear anything back about when it's going to be done or where it stands until it was completed, and then you'd have an email come back and say, hey, we took care of that as you requested. We're looking at a piece of software that's offered by our current GIS software provider. That would sort of be the next generation of that work order customer relationship management tool, where we could, based on address, have it be in the GIS system and have something that both we can look at internally and the resident can look at it externally at the status of your request. I don't know that we'll ever get exact of when it's going to get done, but we could definitely show a status of received or dispatched and completed so that you could at least get a better
sense of what stage the whole
Exactly.
thing is at least. That makes a lot of sense, and it seems as much as could be asked.
Yeah.
for that
I
kind
would
of thing.
love to be able to get that done.
That's great. Well, I say it all the time. You're a font of information. We appreciate you sharing that with us. Hopefully folks did have their specific questions, concerns addressed. I'm sure if they didn't, that you will hear about it
absolutely.
through one of the various venues you just mentioned for people to report things to. I will also reiterate, as you said, that I hope we are not having this conversation again for another year at least, and that you have a chance to learn the lessons of these last weeks and months.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look forward to future updates on parking and not on snow.
Summer activities.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much,
You're
sir.
welcome. Thank you,
You are
James.
a good man. And that concludes today's episode of Talk of the Town with our town manager, Adam Chapdelaine. We appreciate your joining us and hope you got something from it, and we'll see you next time. I'm James Millan. Thanks.